This is Land of Havilah, Genesis 30. Jacob came to Haran. He worked for his uncle Laban and took 2 of Laban's daughters as wives, Leah and Rachel. Right away, Leah gave birth to 4 boys in a row, but then she stopped bearing. Leah has a servant, Zilpah, and Rachel has a servant, Bilhah. Verse 1. When Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister. She said to Jacob, "Give me children, or else I will die." Jacob's anger burned against Rachel, and he said, "Am I in God's place, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb?" Comment: Rachel's putting the blame on Jacob, which made Jacob angry. The results are up to God, he says. Coming up, Rachel has a solution. Verse 3. She said, "Behold my maid Bilhah, go into her that she may bear on my knees, and I also may obtain children by her." Comment: that she may bear on my knees is a saying same as that she might bear on my behalf. Verse 4. She gave him Bilhah her servant as wife, and Jacob went in to her. Bilhah conceived and bore Jacob a son. Rachel said, "God has judged me, and has also heard my voice, and has given me a son." Therefore she called his name Dan. Comment: Dan means judge. God judged Rachel and found her worthy to bear a son through Bilhah. Verse 7. Bilhah, Rachel's servant, conceived again and bore Jacob a second son. Rachel said, "I've wrestled with my sister with mighty wrestlings and have prevailed." She named him Naphtali. Comment: there's rivalry because Leah's bearing and Rachel not, and Rachel's loved but Leah not. Later on in the law of Moses, it'll stipulate, quote, "You shall not take a wife in addition to her sister to be a rival," Leviticus 18:18. Naphtali means my wrestling, Rachel's wrestling with Leah. Verse 9. When Leah saw that she had finished bearing, she took Zilpah, her servant, and gave her to Jacob as a wife. Zilpah, Leah's servant, bore Jacob a son. Leah said, "How fortunate!" She named him Gad. Comment: the meaning of Gad's not clear, but it seems to be fortune or luck, according to the context. Verse 12. Zilpah, Leah's servant, bore Jacob a second son. Leah said, "Happy am I, for the daughters will call me happy." She named him Asher. Comment: Asher means happy one. Verse 14. Reuben went in the days of the wheat harvest and found mandrakes in the field, and brought them to his mother Leah. Then Rachel said to Leah, "Please give me some of your son's mandrakes." Leah said to her, "Is it a small matter that you've taken away my husband? Would you take away my son's mandrakes also?" Rachel said, "Therefore he'll lie with you tonight for your son's mandrakes." Jacob came from the field in the evening, and Leah went out to meet him and said, "You must come in to me, for I've surely hired you with my son's mandrakes." He lay with her that night. Comment: we can deduce that Jacob almost always avoided sleeping with Leah because he didn't want to upset Rachel. Mandrakes is Hebrew dudaim, which from the context was a valuable wild plant probably associated with lovemaking, but the identity of the plant's not sure. Leah had some of these plants and gave some to Rachel with the agreement that Rachel would allow Jacob to sleep in Leah's tent that night. Right after, verse 17. God listened to Leah, and she conceived and bore Jacob a fifth son. Leah said, "God has given me my hire because I gave my servant to my husband." She named him Issachar. Comment: the meaning of Issachar is also uncertain, but as suggested by the text, it might mean hire or wages. Verse 19. Leah conceived again and bore a sixth son to Jacob. Leah said, "God has endowed me with a good dowry. Now my husband will live with me because I've borne him 6 sons. She named him Zebulun. Comment: Zebulun means habitation. Leah hopes Jacob will inhabit her tent. The rivalries over Jacob and bearing sons is wonderful in every way, and a way of hopefully scoring points with Jacob. Verse 21. Afterwards she bore a daughter and named her Dinah. Comment: Dinah means justice. The wives had other daughters, Genesis 37:35, but Dinah is the only one we know by name. Coming up, it's finally Rachel's turn. Verse 22. God remembered Rachel and listened to her and opened her womb. She conceived, bore a son, and said, "God has taken away my reproach." She named him Joseph, saying, "May Yahweh add another son to me." Comment: Joseph's going to be one amazing character. Joseph means increase. In review and order of birth, there were Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, Issachar, Zebulun, Dinah their sister, and Joseph. Leah had 6 sons, Bilhah 2, Zilpah 2, and Rachel only Joseph so far, but she'll have Benjamin later, to make 2 for her. 12 total for Jacob. When Jacob was growing up, his parents had favorites. Jacob let it become a family pattern when he favored his wife Rachel over his other wives. Now that Rachel has a son, we'll come to find out that Jacob will favor this son above all the others. Each generation, the favoritism gave way to envy, division, and hatred. Verse 25. When Rachel had borne Joseph, Jacob said to Laban, "Send me away that I may go to my own place and to my own country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, and let me go, for you know my service with which I have served you." Laban said to him, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, stay here, for I have divined that Yahweh has blessed me for your sake." He said, "Appoint me your wages, and I will give it." Comment, Yahweh was with Jacob. Laban could see it because Jacob was so productive. Why was Yahweh with Jacob? Because Yahweh ordained it in the first place, then because Isaac put the blessing on Jacob. Yahweh confirmed it in the latter dream, telling Jacob he'd be with him and keep him. The blessing's visible even to an outsider like Laban. As in the previous generation, Isaac's blessing was visible to King Abimelech, and in the generation before that, Abraham's blessing was visible to Pharaoh, King Abimelech, Melchizedek, and the Hittites. Naturally, Laban wants Jacob to stay, not because he's fond of Yahweh, but because he's fond of getting rich off Jacob. For 14 years, Jacob worked only to pay the bride price for Leah and Rachel, plus his living expenses. Now that the 14 years are up, Jacob's ready to move on, but Laban wants him to stick around. Coming up, Jacob will set forth the terms under which he's willing to stay and keep working for Laban, but first he'll drive home the point that Yahweh is with him. Verse 29. Jacob said to him, "You know how I've served you and how your livestock have fared with me. For it was little which you had before I came, and it's increased to a multitude. Yahweh's blessed you wherever I turned. Now when will I provide for my own house also?" Comment, Jacob says Yahweh has indeed blessed you because of me. He's using Yahweh's blessing as a plank in negotiation. Jacob hasn't built any possessions of his own all this time. Laban's trickery put him 7 years behind. Now Jacob says he wants to provide for his own house also, meaning he wants a stake in the action, a chance to earn some of the flocks for himself. Verse 31. Laban said, "What shall I give you?" Jacob said, "You shall not give me anything. If you will do this thing for me, I will again feed your flock and keep it." Comment, what the reader doesn't know at this point is that Yahweh spoke to Jacob in a dream and instructed him how to negotiate this contract. So when Jacob says, "If you will do this thing for me," the one thing he has in mind will make him rich. To start, Jacob says, "Don't give me anything now." Coming up, the terms that Jacob proposes. Verse 32. "I will pass through all your flock today, removing from there every speckled and spotted one, and every black one among the sheep, and the speckled and spotted among the goats. This will be my hire. So my righteousness will answer for me hereafter, when you come concerning my hire that is before you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats, and black among the sheep, that might be with me, will be considered stolen." Comment, the deal's hard to understand and follow no matter how carefully we read it, no matter how many translations we consult, and no matter how much time we put into it. To your narrator's best guess, Jacob proposed to divide the flocks into pure whites in one group and colored in another. Both groups would remain as Laban's property. Jacob would get nothing of the existing flocks. His only pay would be that whenever the pure white flock would give birth to a lamb or kid with coloration, that lamb or kid would be his. He'd put it into a third flock for his own. Laban thought this would be a good deal. How likely would it be that the pure white flock would give birth to young with coloration? Therefore, verse 34, Laban said, "Behold, let it be according to your word." Comment, Laban agrees. Now still speaking of Laban, verse 35, "That day he removed the male goats that were streaked and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white in it, and all the black ones among the sheep, and gave them into the hand of his sons. He set 3 days' journey between himself and Jacob fed the rest of Laban's flocks." Comment, on day 1, Laban made sure that he took all the colored animals and gave them to his sons, sent them far off so the animals with coloration wouldn't mix with the white ones, and he only left the white ones in Jacob's care. Coming up, Jacob has a three-part strategy to make the white flocks produce young with coloration. First part, verse 37. Jacob took to himself rods of fresh poplar, almond, and plane tree, peeled white streaks in them, and made the white appear which was in the rods. He set the rods which he had peeled opposite the flocks in the gutters and the watering troughs where the flocks came to drink. They conceived when they came to drink. The flocks conceived before the rods, and the flocks produced streaked, speckled, and spotted. Comment: the use of the wooden rods makes no sense to us that it would have any scientific effect on producing colored young. But it wasn't foolish if Jacob did it in faith. Indeed, God blessed it and made it effective. The white flock produced young with coloration. In foreshadowing of what Christ would do, Jesus said he didn't come to call the righteous to repentance, but sinners, Matthew 9:13. As Jacob only kept animals with color, Christ calls only those who know they're sinners. Laban will become a picture of Satan as time moves on, and Jacob will stay a picture of Christ. In this vignette, we see Christ winning a people from Satan over to himself, one person at a time, individuals who know they're sinners, but whom Christ will cleanse. Coming up, Jacob's second strategy, verse 40. Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the streaked and all the black in Laban's flock. He put his own droves apart and didn't put them into Laban's flock. Comment: part 2 is that when the young males with color were old enough to mate, he made sure they got exclusive rights to the females. As soon as the colored young could be weaned, Jacob called them out so their mothers would go back into heat and be ready to mate again. Now part 3 of his strategy, verse 41. Whenever the stronger of the flock conceived, Jacob laid the rods in front of the eyes of the flocks in the gutters that they might conceive among the rods. But when the flock were feeble, he didn't put them in. So the feebler were Laban's and the stronger Jacob's. Comment: he only put the rods in when the stronger ones were breeding. The result of all this was that, verse 43, the man increased exceedingly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. Comment: Jacob used his animals to trade for servants, camels, and donkeys, and whatever else he wanted. He left home with nothing but a staff, Genesis 32:10, but he also carried the blessing, Genesis 27:33. In verse 43, he, quote, increased exceedingly, end quote. It was the blessing at work. Even if our strategies don't particularly make sense, God can make them produce for us. Genesis 31's next at landofhavilah.net, Genesis 31.